and thanks for tuning in to the Path 11 podcast. I am your host, April Hanna. At the Path 11 podcast, we are here trying to deliver leading-edge research on consciousness, healing, and metaphysics. And just like you, we are trying to answer the big questions about life. Who are we? Why are we here? And what is our purpose? We hope by listening to our podcast, it will make each day you live on Earth a little easier to understand. And now for today's podcast. I am joined today with Richard Smith, who is also known as the UFOteacher. He is a professional, life-changing speaker and motivational experiencer, web design consultant and visionary, author on the topic of Extraterrestrial Contact, the Moorish Legacy, human origins, and related matters. Smith received high honors at New York State University for his dedicated work with extraterrestrial intervention and alien contact phenomena. A published author of the groundbreaking book series, The Vaulted Journals of UFOteacher, Smith is committed to raising conscious awareness in our health and well-being as caretakers of the planet, as well as creating a better understanding of our place in the cosmos, both physically and spiritually. He believes that we must focus on the lost knowledge of where we come from before we can truly understand the ancient wisdom of where we are going on the path of our everyday lives. And I'd like to welcome Richard to the Path 11 podcast today. Hi, Richard. How you doing?
Hi there. Thank you for having me on the show today.
Yes. Now, we are going to do a little bit of a teaser interview today as we speak to you, because you have some books that I would really like to go into more in depth, but we're a little short on our time today here. So we're going to give our listeners a little bit of a taste, and then we're going to have you back on, and we're going to go more in depth with some of your writings that you have. But one of the things that I found pretty funny when I was going through your stuff was how you got the name UFOteacher, and that will kind of take us back a little bit, where you'll get to cover a little bit of your history and your involvement in art and all of that, and how you got the name UFOteacher.
Yeah, that's interesting how that came about. Not too many people ask about that, but it was. I put it on my website. I put it in the book as well. And I had started off as an artist, and it was at the time that I had been putting on my first art exhibition at the State University of New York at Old Westbury College, and it was all part of themes and information that had been downloaded to me from an extraterrestrial source, and that became that exhibition there. It was about 3 years worth of work, culminating also in a giant installation piece. But what had people who had mysteriously shown up there were a group of Japanese businessmen who seemed to be, where they came from, how they found out about it, I have no idea. But they seemed to be, I turned around and I noticed they were extremely interested in examining each and every one of the paintings. And someone from the local media was in attendance there as well. They were talking to me, strangely enough, about the one piece called "Hi, I'm the Media, Are You an Alien?" And right at that point, one of the Japanese businessmen who had been examining one of the other paintings, I think it was called Laboratory, that they were looking at, they looked up at me right at that point and said, "You are the UFOteacher." And the name stuck, and shortly after that, I decided, okay, that's going to be my official website, ufoteacher.com, and that's how that came about.
I love it. I think it's great. Isn't it weird, like, those moments in time where it's so small yet can be extremely significant?
Yes, I know. It's just because people hear the name UFOteacher, and then you can see their brain freezing up when they say it to themselves. It's like, what? How did you get that name? And I said, well, this is what happened, So, and it always gets a good laugh out of it there as to how it came about. It was just, me, a member of the local media, and a Japanese businessman. And, it sounds like a joke, like, so-and-so walks into a bar, something like that. But the artwork, the reason that solo exhibition even existed at all was because, and just to put it into a time frame, that was December 1995. And December 11th to be exact, which is an important date in my life there for a lot of reasons. But it began when I had turned 21, which was 1991. Okay, some years prior to that. And when I had turned 21, I had received my first, what I call my first awakening, which I talk about in the book too. And in that awakening, everything had come flooding back to me like a cluster bomb of memories. Everything I thought from childhood on had been really active dreams per se, very visual dreams, very detail-oriented dreams, which had been put away and buried for a long time through adolescence, teenage years, and so forth. It all came flooding back as memories, which was a huge shock. And right at that point, in that first awakening, the being which I would find out had always been there with me since about 4 years old, as early as I can remember, had made herself known to me. I say herself because she's always come across to me as a female entity. And this is the one I describe in all the books as the crone. Even in the original one I published way back in 2005, I refer to her as mother, but over time, more so predominantly I refer to her as the crone. And I describe her as a female praying mantis type of extraterrestrial being. One of the ancients, or the healers, as they're also known, because her race is few and far between these days. But in that initial awakening at the age of 21, she had asked me, would you use your, talents and skills to educate the masses? Would you take the information, download it, and put it into what you're going to do? And it was around that time that I had gone from high school to the State University of New York, Farmingdale College, for advertising, art, and design. And that had actually finished up in 91. And then there was a gap between Farmingdale College and Old Westbury College for a year. And I started at Old Westbury College, where I actually found myself, and all this kicked off in 92. So it was kind of like she knew where I was heading and what I was going to be doing and what I was going to end up focusing on, because all the professors at Farmingdale College with commercial art would tell me all the original ideas from commercial art come from fine art. So I decided to go for the visual arts/fine art program at Old Westbury, based on nothing more than a one-sentence description of what their curriculum was about. And then something inside of me triggered and said, okay, that's where I got to go. This is, how I figured out what I was going to do for the next 4 years after my associate's degree to get my bachelor's. So, most people would look at you and think you're nuts. I said, that's how you made your decision as to what you wanted to do? I said, well, yeah, I just kind of knew. And it was just one of those things that a lot of people are probably not lucky enough to know at that age what they're going to be doing and be concrete about it to the point of having a solid foundation of what direction you want to go in. And that's what began the downloading sessions in the studio at college there. And I would start transferring it into the artwork based on different social themes. What was interesting is that the mentorship program that exists there with these international, well-established artists who are your professors, these are the kind of people where, let's face it, in 1992, and here I am, I have to approach my mentor with this whole idea of the alien abduction phenomena and extraterrestrial intervention. And of course, you would have loved to have been a fly on the wall for that conversation, okay?
Yeah.
Because these are all established artists, they don't want to hear this wackadoo stuff being put into artwork. it didn't compute. But what did compute was my one mentor, Luis Kamnitzer. He took me under his wing and he says, okay, he says, I get it. I know where you're coming from, because I presented it to him from the perspective of politics, economics, sociology, the human condition, to get it away from, the airy-fairy New Age stuff and the dingbat, paranoid conspiratorial stuff, and really focus on the human condition as a reflection of ourselves. And he told me, he says, okay. He says, I will let you do this. He says, but he says, you better make it damn good. He says, I don't want any of this, and these are his words. He says, I don't want any of this airy-fairy crap showing up in your artwork. I said, I promise, no airy-fairy crap. It'll be serious, okay? So that's what started that relationship there. Even to the point as the artwork, we would have tutorials every semester leading up to the final exhibition, where we could show our artwork again from the tutorials, but we had to do something original also for the exhibition. And so that's what I had done. I had shown my whole series of work and the new exhibition piece as well, all together in the same gallery show, so people could see the sequence of how it grew and how it evolved in theme and in purpose. So he had understood. He never believed anything I said. He thought I was nuts. He told me to my face, he says, I don't believe any of this, but he says, I understand the angle you're coming from, and that's important. So he would even go as far as defending me in the eyes of the other professors in the art curriculum, because there was one particular tutorial where I started getting into hot and heavy controversial subject matter with religion, and one of the other professors got absolutely bent out of shape about it, to say it politely. And he came to my defense and says, he has the right to do that. Okay? You can't attack him for that. And so, that's what I had always admired about being, and his name is Luis Kamnitzer. And that, it turned into a watershed in December 11th of 1995, when I had the opening reception for the art show. That was, in a lot of ways, in just about every way actually, the foundational beginning of everything for, the next 23 years. So, and of course that evolved into, around 1999, I got a rather mysterious phone call out of the blue, and I talk about this episode in The More, the Mason, and the Alien, where it sounded very staticky, garbled, like someone trying to communicate from a million miles away. Hint, hint. But basically, the message was, it sent goosebumps up and down my spine, because it was very eerie, like something out of a horror movie. But basically the message was, why don't you use the artwork as an inspiration for writing? That's your next step. And then click, hang up. And of course, in those days, you still had, there was no cell phones, so the landlines had, what was it, the star 69 or something to try and call the back. Yeah. Uh-huh. And all I got on that was a hissing and a busy signal. I was like, well, that figures with the way my life goes. And so that's what began writing that their very first foundational book, Legions of Light, Armies of Darkness. That was all inspired by the artwork, and taking the artwork and putting it into a literary form. And then, that was officially published through Author House in 2005. 10 years later, and that's the mysterious 10-year gap from 2005 to 2015, all of a sudden, the floodgates opened, and the opportunity to get back to the writing like I always wanted to happened. And basically that 10-year gap was just because life got in the way. And I because I was married once before. And then got divorced. The gates opened. I ended up pulling and digging through the back of my closet. I think it was January of 2014. Going through some old stuff, getting rid of stuff because the divorce was being finalized. Ended up finding something I had completely forgotten about. The beginnings of what was supposed to be the next manuscript that I had started years before and never got back to because life got in the way. So I pulled it out. I looked at it. It was fragmented, broken chapters, pieces, ideas, excerpts. And I looked at it. I was like, you know what? This is a complete pile of crap. We are starting over. And I just got rid of all of it, started over from scratch because I had 10 years worth of life to now inject into what would eventually become the More, the Mason, and the Alien. And at that point, as I'm sitting in the back of my closet, buried in manuscript paperwork and looking at all the different pieces that would have been, and realizing that this is not the way to go. Obviously, things happen for a reason. There was a reason why I was forced to wait 10 years. All of a sudden, the crone is there again, as always, and she says, now you have to do this. Now is the opportunity to get back and get the damn book published. And this time, do it the right way. And so I started in January of 2014, nonstop, like gangbusters, right on through to I was done by July of 2015, year and a half, straight on through. And, I have the imprint of my butt on the dining room seat to prove that because I never moved from it. But it was officially published September of 2015. And that sort of became a tradition at that point, September 1st, 2015, because then I started, I gave myself a 6-month hiatus because my brain had been so burned out from writing that book that I needed a break in between. But I already knew where the recent part 2 was going to go. So I started up again on that. And by September 1st of 2018 last year, the More, the Mason, and the Alien Part 2 was published. And now currently I am working on Part 3, which Part 1 was a call to action. Part 2 is a real manifesto. And for the audience listening, Part 3 is going to be about the Invisible College.
And all of your writings, aside from your paintings, is all of this also downloads and information that you're getting?
I explain it, I talk about it in the book how what began as, quote unquote, the conversation, which is many dialogues, a dialogue in the void over the years, it went into the writing as well. Okay. And, like I said to you, before we got on too, sometimes I feel like when I am sitting and doing a show with people and, I get a chance to read their books, that it just feels rushed. And I wanted to take my time getting into some of your work because I think that, I want to give it some due diligence. One of the things that, and sometimes it just feels rushed. It's like you can almost create like 3 shows out of one person's book. Yes. Right.
You can't cover everything. But one of the things, 2 things that strikes me, and I'm wondering if you have any advice to our listeners, because when I began reading your first book, one of the things that made me just kind of stop in my tracks a little bit, you made me really think back to my childhood and think about, my imaginary friends and certain dreams,
Yes.
that I've had. And I'm kind of like, all right, how do I access these downloads more readily so I can understand them now in the adult mind? And was what I was experiencing some of what you're talking about? And so I don't know if you have any advice for people who are kind of like listening to you and listening to your process and then doing what I did, which was go back a little bit to my childhood and say, whoa, wait a second, maybe that wasn't a dream. Maybe that was an encounter. How do we begin to open up that access for ourselves? Or is this something that will only open if and when you're ready?
I've had a lot of people ask that question about, how can they access that? I've always seen it happen with people at different times in their lives. For me, it was 21. For the new generation out there, it could happen for them at the age of 13, and for others, it might not be until they're 65. Okay, so, and everything in between. So there's that, but there's also the valued aspect of it's just tranquility of mind, meditation. Okay, finding your own private spot each day to open yourself up to what is going on around you on a daily basis, and we just don't realize it. The stuff that hides in plain sight, the stuff that walks between the raindrops, which is just a poetic way of describing that which can walk between dimensions and walks in and out of ours, like it's Grand Central Station. So it's if people, even though for some of us it happens as a definite, brick over the head kind of moment, and then boom, you're awake. It's sort of like if you remember the movie Ghost, to Whoopi Goldberg's character, right?
Yep.
All of a sudden, it just hit her like a ton of bricks, and all of a sudden, her gift from her mother was there, bam, and then she couldn't get rid of it. It's like that for contactees, experiencers, and abductees as well, but not for everyone. For others, they can go after it if they put it out to the universe. Hey, I'm ready, and you go after it with meditation. Then you start calming your mind and you start remembering things that will come as a shock because you completely forgot about them. It's like, oh my God, yeah, that did happen in my childhood. Why did I forget that? Well, a lot of it has to do with, and this will help people as well in terms of remembering, going after it, exploring, and awakening, is that and I talk about this in the book too. What is the fundamental foundation between those of us who have a healthy transition to it and those of us who are put into an emotional coma trying to deal with it? The difference is family. Your family foundations, your family support mechanism. I came from parents who were extremely open to everything from the Twilight Zone to Star Trek to Star Wars, okay, and everything in between, all right? I had a mother who would sit there with me and who was very open to, ancient astronauts and how it was the foundation of all religious belief. So she would sit there with the Bible with me in secret and go through it and point out references to aliens and UFOs in that kind of literature. She would swear me to secrecy and say, because at the time as a kid, my brother and I were in Catholic school, so she would say, if you ever repeat this to anyone, I'll disown you, okay? So this is between us. And she would even talk with my grandmother about it, okay? I remember as a kid, an inspirational book from my mother was Red Giants and White Dwarfs. And it was a phenomenal study of the living universe. And that became a huge inspiration. I remember the day over at my grandparents, she was actually talking to my grandmother about that book, and it just seemed like kind of a lightning rod for her to be more open to this. Now, of course, when that reciprocates, because if your parents are open to it and they raise you in that environment of being open to science fiction is not just science fiction, okay? And that, the Starship Enterprise really is out there, or the Millennium Falcon really is out there somewhere, then you end up giving closure to your parents, because many years ago when my mother was still alive, I would come back to her and talk to her about the things that I learned. And it would give her such a magnificent sense of completion in her life that she wasn't nuts, because when she was a child, she was made to feel like, she was hatched on the front doorstep like she didn't belong. Whereas when her son comes along and comes back to her with these extraterrestrial experiences and starts telling her, Mom, you're not nuts. This is real. And the only reason I could do that was because she was brave enough to let me go in that direction, endorse it, embrace it, support it, and be open to it. And so was my dad. And my dad was open enough to realize how to take his childhood upbringing, which was all about Westerns, and translate that to space. I mean, what's Star Trek? Wagon Train to the Stars. What's Deep Space Nine? It's basically Bonanza in space, okay? He knew how to see the translation. And so my brother is 100% on board with this, all right? Our family bloodline has always been involved with this. That was one of the things I realized in the awakening. And what was passed on to us is now being passed on to my nieces, because my brother has 4 girls. So, and I see it in how gifted they are in that generation. They are so much more evolved in anything from my brother and I. So it's when you are open to it in your family, that makes all the difference in the world. When you're not, my wife Linda, she came from the other perspective. Yes, she had her mom as a support mechanism, but that was it. And so she grew up in an environment where she was made to feel like talking about such things, like my mother, was verboten, ridiculous. You're an idiot. You're crazy. You're out of your mind. Shut up. So it took forever for her to come out of that shell that had been put around her and feel like it was okay to talk about it to anyone, including me. Okay? I mean, her own husband. So that's something that is important for people to realize. And over the years, since the 90s, I have seen that dividing line as the constant. The ones who are not well adjusted to social interaction are the ones who were shunned by their own families. But those of us who you'd never be able to pick out of a crowd, like me, why am I so anonymous? Why is it easy for me to just blend into a crowd? Because I have those social skills, and that's because it's something that is easy for me to talk about. And that's all because of my parents. So that's something that your audience should pay attention to.
Yeah. And I would say, too, when people come to their own awakening, if you're not really, totally delving into all of this information, it could feel very isolating, like who's out there that is experiencing this. And, it really wasn't until about 1.5 years ago, myself, where I never really was too involved in the UFO research or the extraterrestrials or things like that. But there's been more of a calling in this 1.5 years to begin to interview people like yourself. And I am being exposed to a very, very large world of a phenomenon that doesn't seem so out of this world anymore. It's like,
right.
Okay, there's thousands of people talking about it, like, so, and I think that does bring up a really good point, which is to be able to have that some form of community or social network that can help you and support you and not judge you, and, and help you through the process of that awakening. Now, one of the questions that I wanted to ask you that will hopefully lead us into the next interview that we bring you on. What I'm curious to know, and it probably can't be summed up in so many words, but, as I'm looking at your gallery of artwork, and I see the 16 pictures, I do feel that you are kind of, the vessel in which information is being sent through, right? So a lot of the artwork that we're looking at, I also interpret it as the extraterrestrials trying to explain something to the masses, but they're working through you to deliver that message. Same, with the books that you're writing. Do you have an umbrella of what you feel they are trying to communicate through you out to everyone else?
Yeah. And ultimately, it goes back to I think what you had mentioned early on in the introductions there was that the main theme is you have to learn to crawl before you walk. You have to learn to walk before you fly. And in translation to this subject matter, what that means is you have to know what you lost from the past repetitively over and over again before you know where you're going in the near, immediate, and distant future. Otherwise, as the old phrase goes, history repeats itself for those who do not learn from it. And the human race as a whole has been in a vicious cycle of repeating history over and over again because we don't learn from it. And the reason we don't learn from it is because we don't realize what we've lost in the first place, which is not a legacy of crawling out of the Ice Age like a bunch of club swinging thugs, okay? It is a grand galactic legacy that includes Mother Earth and living with Mother Earth, not against her. One of the other resounding themes is that we have put ourselves in the position of being labeled by our own planet as germ warfare. And when the human race becomes labeled as germ warfare, the human race is setting itself up for failure and imminent disaster because the planet is not going to tolerate that. So one of the important things to realize is that the benevolent factions are here because they have an investment in flesh and bone, our interaction, our ecological balance, our spiritual development. Yes, the malevolent factions have more of an interest in the financial aspects of it and controlling the planet as a chunk of real estate and just using us as slaves. But that's the glass half full, the glass half empty. The glass that's half full, which we conveniently ignore, is why are the benevolent factions here? So it's always going to come down to flesh and bone versus wood and stone. Okay, the human factor versus the shallow materialistic factor that sees us as nothing more than fodder, and that's our own fault because we never reclaimed our own starborn legacy on this planet. We never reclaimed the fact that we belong and have an allegiance to this planet. We ended up severing our ties as caretakers of the earth. And this is where we've gone into a downward spiral of, something that is nothing short of genocidal activity.
An allegiance to our planet. That rings pretty true. That gives me something to think about too. And kind of when I hear that, it's like we're really not owning it. We're not taking care of the earth. We're not claiming it necessarily to be ours. Maybe because we feel an entitlement that things should just be given to us and that the world should just work and Mother Earth should just function without us having to do anything. I don't know if that's kind of a part of it being here. But whether I'm talking to somebody like yourself that's talking about extraterrestrials, whether I'm talking about a researcher of consciousness or somebody that is in the healing field. I mean, the message more and more over the last few years keeps coming down to we need to start taking care of our planet. And I do see more calls to action of, people, let's say the plastic straw movement, right? It might be something so tiny and small like that. But, I do feel that there is more of a movement of us trying to take care of the planet at a very slow rate. But, I think that no matter whatever is going on collectively as a consciousness, this message is coming through in all areas of people who are awakened, not just through, ET contact or things like that, but like everyone that is really in touch and on their spiritual path, it seems to be coming back more and more of this very strong message of us really needing to take care of the earth.
Well, yes, that's very truthful because drawing upon something from the original college there, the updated version of The Day the Earth Stood Still is a famous line from Keanu Reeves where he turns to her and says, the earth can live without the human race. The human race cannot live without the earth.
Well, that might be a great way or a great place for us to end for our conversation today. But I'm really looking forward to have you back on to talk about Legions of Light, Armies of Darkness, and The Moor, the Mason, and the Alien, Part 1 and Part 2. And you said Part 3. When's that going to come out? September 1st, 2020? 2020?
That might. I think I'm going to give myself a chance, and I think I would be shooting for September 2021 to release it. So, because it's going to be an interesting focus on stuff that's hiding in plain sight, educating the masses, even on a grander scale, in film, literature, art. Okay, and using film as a foundation to teach people how to see the symbolism.
Right. And, there must be something, too, about your energy. If you think about the Moor, the Mason, and the Alien, you're doing like the Part 1 and Part 2. And for some reason, intuitively, I would say you're probably the first person that I've ever asked where I wanted to break up the show a little bit more and do a Part 1 and a Part 2.
Okay.
So there must be something there with whatever that is. I don't know what that is, but I just made that connection now, and I'm thinking, oh, this is interesting, and who knows who is facilitating the work that you and I are doing together, but I kind of feel and hear it loud and clear, like there is more than just a Part 1 here. So do you want to let our listeners know what we are going to be discussing in your 2 books to give them just a little taste if they want to actually run out and buy it before we produce the next show?
Oh, sure. Definitely. It's titles like Legions of Light, Armies of Darkness, and The Moor, the Mason, and the Alien, A Call to Action, or a Vril Manifesto. Where do those titles come from? What do they really represent? What are they talking about? What is, why is it broken down to the 3 basic components that affects the entire human race on this planet? What is the Moor? What is the Mason? What is the Alien? What does that represent to us? And how has it affected us from ancient history right on through to today? Okay, how is it relevant to today? Everything from where does the word angel come from to what does the Sasquatch represent? What is the difference between the 2 infamous phrases, extraterrestrial intervention and the alien abduction phenomena? These things are not the same. What's the difference?
Right. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Great. All right, Richard. Well, thank you so much for taking the time and agreeing to take more time to come back on the Path 11 podcast. I think your work is really, really interesting. And I'm so glad that we can also be, this platform to share it with our audience as well. And hopefully they'll share it with their friends and it'll just kind of keep spreading globally. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on the show. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Path 11 podcast today. I hope you all enjoyed this show. And if you haven't checked out our Patreon page, I'd like you to do so because we are going to start putting some content over there that is only for our Patreon subscribers. You can get content for as little as donating $1 a month, and it could just be a one-time donation. We have other freebies over there that you can get depending upon how much you would like to donate. And again, it could be a one-time donation, or you can continue to keep your subscription on a monthly basis at that donation level. But I just put my MBT immersive experience, which was a four-day intensive meditation training in Tennessee with physicist Tom Campbell. I was listening to binaural beats, going to altered states of consciousness, having out-of-body experiences and life-changing experiences that I was able to bring back for myself, for my clients, for my friends. That was just out of this world. So if you would like to listen to that, I'd like you to head on over to path11podcast.com. You're going to see an orange button that says Patreon. Become a Patreon today, and you can have access to that podcast. And I would like to remind you to head on over to path11productions.com and check out the membership that we have for the Afterlife Awareness Conference. We have over 25 hours of footage with amazing speakers like William Buhlman, Thomas John, Terry Daniel, Suzanne Geisman, Suzanne Northrup, Linda Fitch, Austin Wells, just a few people to name off that were amazing. These workshops are just so valuable. So I think that you would really enjoy it. It's also a great thing to think about to maybe give the gift to somebody who is struggling with grief. If you are looking for resources, this is a great conference to send people to check out. And thanks again for listening today.